Hey y'all, Kyle here. In this video, I'm going to be talking about how to configure ComfyUI to serve as a local endpoint for the pseudorandom plugin that's running in Rhino. So we're going to go over a number of things, three sort of big ones. We're going to talk about the installation of two essential node packages for ComfyUI. That is sudo comfy and IP adapter. These enable communication between Rhino and ComfyUI. I'm also going to talk about how to configure sort of key directory locations and set things up in a way that makes things work and also makes them work well and nicely. And then finally, I'll be talking about how to download and place some essential machine learning models, such as checkpoints and control net models and this kind of thing, which are either very central to the way that pseudorandom works or are among the requirements for the workflows. The kind of built-in workflows that come with pseudorandom for Rhino. Okay. Before we get started, let's just make sure that we're ready. So in this tutorial, we're going to assume that you've got a basic understanding of how ComfyUI works. If you need a refresher, I got some links here on the page that should help with that. You should also have ComfyUI desktop installed. There's a number of different ways to run ComfyUI, but this tutorial uses ComfyUI desktop, which is the latest version and has all of runs on Windows and has all the latest features and stuff. So we're going to be using that. And then finally, you should have pseudorandom for Rhino installed and licensed. So that pseudorandom for Rhino is a plugin for Rhino. Just show this briefly here. This is what it looks like there on the right. You can see that I've got all the Comfy panels set up the way that I should, and things are kind of ready to render. Nothing's hooked up yet, so I can't render, but this is what things should look like over on the Rhino side before you get started here. So if you don't have any of those things, you should watch some of the other tutorial videos that I've made to get them up and running. Otherwise, let's get started with part one. All right, let's get started with part one, in which we're going to install some required custom nodes or node packages. So what is a node package? So a node package in ComfyUI are kind of add-ons that define new types for particular tasks or otherwise extend the functionality of ComfyUI. So it's like a plugin for ComfyUI. These are maintained not by ComfyUI developers themselves, but by other kinds of contributors such as us. So to install a node package, you use the manager. This is the manager button. If it's not there, then you should check out my previous videos that explain how to make sure that your things are installed properly, which opens up this dialog. All we care about here is the custom nodes manager, which looks like this. And this is quite simple. You can just search for what you're looking for. We're looking for sudo comfy. There we go. And this tells us a bit about the plugin, the name. You can see the author is SudoTools. That's us. The last time it was updated, etc. And to install it, you just click install. And then choose a version. In this case, for sudo comfy, I suggest that you choose the nightly build. This determines like how often your installation will update. Nightly means you'll always get the most recent one, and that's a good idea for something which is going to change as quickly as our plugin. So let's select nightly, click select, and there we go. All right, so it says a restart's required. We're not going to do that yet because we have one more node package to install. I'm going to clear that search, and now I'm going to search for another node package called IP adapter, and I'm going to search for, in particular, IP adapter _ plus. And you see there's two of them here, which is a little bit disconcerting. There actually might be more by the time you search for it. And how do you know which one to look for? So we are looking for the one that's made by a particular author whose name is Matteo. There you go, this one. So this is the one that we're looking for. It looks like somebody cloned the original IP adapter plugin and did something else with it. So we're going to want the original one with all of the stars. That means that people like it. So we'll use this one. So this is 2.0. We're going to install, and instead of choosing nightly here, we're going to choose version 2.0.0. We're not looking for the latest build of this one. We want them kind of a more stable build. So 2.0.0 should work with the current build of our plugin. So click select, and then wait for that to install. Ah, very good. So a restart is required in both cases. So I'll go ahead and click restart here, and then wait for things to install. This happens sometimes. I'm getting a blank screen for ComfyUI. Things usually resolve themselves if I restart. So I'm going to close that and start it again. Here we are. So we're back up, and did it work? I don't know. How do we find out? One way to test to see if the nodes have been installed is to try to add them to the canvas. You do that by double-clicking anywhere in a blank spot on the canvas and start searching for nodes that you're interested in. For pseudo-comfy, there's one which is about JSON files. There we go. So it says here, load JSON auto. That's a node that we made. You can tell that we made it because it says pseudo-comfy over here on the right. So that's great. That means that things are working for our plugin. Double click again, search for IP adapter, and there you go. You have some IP adapter stuff. So that means that the nodes are present. Very good. So that's it. That's part one. We've now installed our custom node packages. Okay, let's move on to part two. And in this part, we're going to be configuring some directory locations and setting things up in terms of file structure when it comes to ComfyUI. Why do we need to do that? So ComfyUI is different than traditional software applications on Windows. And one significant difference is the way in which ComfyUI depends on a managed set of files and directories. This includes things that are kind of core to the ComfyUI interface and operation itself. So like there's JavaScript files for structuring what we're seeing here. There's Python files that do the interpreting and operations on the machine learning models that we work with, et cetera, et cetera. And there's also files that ComfyUI uses to perform that second thing, the image generation tasks that use Python. But there's a set of files that describe the kind of the weights, let's say, the information that's required by the machine learning models that are applied in the service of image generation. So mostly we're going to leave the system files where they were, the first category, but we're going to need to do something else with the other files and directories that we use with ComfyUI, which I'll explain. Okay. So by default, most of the files and directories that I've described live in actually 3 locations on your hard drive after you install ComfyUI Desktop. 2 of the locations we don't really care anything about. They're just the kind of inner workings of the software. This third location, let's call it the ComfyUI base path. This location we care something a little bit more about. So by default, it's here on the C drive, which is the system drive in Windows, in the document subfolder of your user directory. So for me, that's here. Among other things, you see there's a bunch of subfolders here. Most of them we don't care about, but we'll just mention a few. This .venv subdirectory is the virtual Python environment. We definitely don't want to touch that. There's a temp directory, that kind of thing. There is a custom nodes directory. This would be familiar. We just installed some custom nodes. What happened there? If we dig down into that directory, we see the 2 things that we just installed: the pseudo-comfy plugin and the ComfyUI IP Adapter Plus plugin. So that's great. Good to know. Interesting. If you ever need to delete a plugin, you can just come delete a folder. That would work just fine most of the time. But for the most part, we're going to let ComfyUI handle anything to do with that subdirectory. And instead, we're going to focus on a couple of other places. So let's talk about them. Very simple is the output directory right here. So this is just where when images are generated by ComfyUI, this is the default location that they'll be saved. So that's a good thing to know about, and it's in a kind of inconvenient place for me. So we'll talk about how to move it to a different location, but it's entirely optional. This is where images will be generated. Okay. Second is the user folder. There's a bunch of stuff in here, but if we drill down all the way into 3 levels down here, which is at the base path directory user default workflows, this is where workflows are stored. So we may or may not want to do something about that. This is a bit of an inconvenient location for a workflow. And I should say a workflow is like a script, a kind of a recipe that describes to ComfyUI how we want to render an image. So these nodes, this collection of nodes and connections that we see in the typical ComfyUI interface, that is a workflow. So if I were to save this, it would go to this folder location. So It'd be great to have that in a different location, but we have to kind of have a workaround because of a limitation of the software. So let's go back up and we'll come back to that in a minute. Finally, there's the models directory here. This is important. It's got a ton of subfolders that we don't understand. And right now, every single one of them is empty because this is a fresh install of ComfyUI. In the models folder, that's where the files that describe the configuration of machine learning models that we're going to use to generate images, that's where those files live. So we could call these files the model themselves. They're actually more accurately the weights of the neural network that's going to be used to, that interprets them, whatever, that's fine. Let's think of them as the models. They are really they're kind of the workhorse of ComfyUI. These are things like, you may have heard of Flux or Stable Diffusion or that kind of thing. Those models, the files that describe those models, live in that directory. These files are quite large, and loading them is one of the more time-consuming aspects of generating image, depending on if we have to load it or not. So it would be great to have, number one, easy access to this folder so we can manage those models. Number two, for wherever that location is, to load quickly. So like on a hard drive that's a pretty speedy hard drive, right? Your system drive might be speedy, I'm not sure. But number three, whatever that location is, has to have plenty of room. So for that reason, and mainly that reason, I like to establish a different location on my computer to store these kinds of things. So for me, it's on a separate drive called the X drive, SIGX, and I have a folder here at the top called ComfyUI, and right now that's empty. So mainly what we're going to be doing is establishing directories here in this alternative location that's just easier to access and more practical in a lot of ways. So much of this is suggested and not required. If you don't have a separate hard drive on your system, then you can skip this part. If you just prefer to keep things where they are, which is like this, you can also skip this part, and all that would be fine, so long as you know how to access your models directory, your output directory, and where your workflows live. All right, let's get started. Before we dive in, just a quick sneak peek at what things will look like when we're done. So in that location that I mentioned, the X drive on my computer, could be elsewhere on your computer, underneath the ComfyUI directory, this is what we're going to establish by the end of the tutorial. A model subfolder with lots of other subdirectories, an output subfolder, and then actually a link to the workflows directory because of a limitation of the ComfyUI software. We can't actually change that directory outright, so we'll just make a link to it. So actually, let's start there. That part is very, very easy. So to create a link to that to the workflows directory, I'm going to drill down here in user default workflows. Yeah, right here. This is where I want to link to. I'll go up a level and then just simply drag this workflows folder, not moving it or copying it. But if I hold down Shift and Control at the same time, there we go. In Windows, it creates a link, right? So workflow. So if I just click that, then I end up going to this location, right? So this is, not ideal, but it'll do. I just want to make sure we have an easy way to get to our workflows from a convenient location. So there we go. So we fulfilled the first part here, or the first step in taking this, making a link here from this location to the workflows location. So as we save workflows, they'll be populated there. All right. So I'm going to go back up to here. There we go. Let's do the second easiest thing, which is to establish this output directory. So the output directory is where images are saved after they're generated. And I just find it inconvenient to have to drill down into this location all the time. So I'm going to create a new folder here, new folder called output. And we're going to use that as the default output instead. And so all we have to, so now with that folder created, is actually quite easy to just go let ComfyUI know about the change that we've made. So I'm going to go back to ComfyUI. You can go to settings, which is down here on the bottom left, this little gear icon, and click that. and the settings things come up. And then I want to go to the directories field, all the way at the bottom. There we go, directories, under server config directories. And I want to set the output directory to, let's see, what's the path to this? I'll just click into there and then copy that path. For me, it's x slash ComfyUI slash output, and that is going to be my output directory. We can change the input directory too, but I hardly ever use that, so I'm not going to do that. So you see here we've got some changes that changes to the server config that need a restart. Let's go ahead and do that. We'll restart. So in the final step in configuring these directories, we're going to establish a custom model path. So that is the place that we store all of our machine learning models, this folder by default. So I'm going to begin by just making a new folder here and I'm going to call it models. Right. And we're going to add some stuff in here. But first, a word about why we're doing this again. So as I mentioned, machine learning models, or let's say the files that describe the weights for machine learning models, these are large. And we're going to be downloading and working with these models often. So as in a organizational context, in a shared working context, in a context in which we're kind of constantly working with these things, it's best to have them in a place that's kind of separate from all of the other software files, one that we can easily access. As I mentioned before, one on a drive that is easily accessible, that's fast, and that's quite large. So for that reason, we're going to put them in this location. So you might be thinking about putting them in another location. A couple of things to keep in mind as you do so, besides the speed and size kind of problem. Whatever the path to this model's location, so for me, it's going to be very simply x slash ComfyUI slash models. You should not put any spaces in that path. In other words, it shouldn't be like my space models. That should never be the directory. And that the reason for that is we're going to be changing some settings, and sometimes the space throws things off a little bit. So however you name your folders, whatever directory you put in, make sure there's not a space in that name. That's just like a kind of one caveat. So once you've figured out where you want to put it, wherever that is, let's call that the custom model path, right? And we'll refer to it in this way. After we've created that, we're going to create a number of subdirectories as seen here. These are all subdirectories for different kinds of machine learning models. Now, you may have noticed in the ComfyUI models path, there's a lot more of these. That's fine. The ones that are important to us are the ones listed here. It could be in the future we need to add to this list, so you can just come back and refer to this process if that's the case. But for now, for a basic setup, these subfolders work just fine. And for everything I've needed to do, this is all that's required. So let's go ahead and add these subfolders. There we go. Now it's important that you get each of these names spelled correctly and there's no syntax error or anything like that. A brief discussion about like what goes in each one of these things. The checkpoints folder, that subdirectory, that's going to contain like the main image generation model, like Stable Diffusion or Flux or whatnot. These are the primary networks that are used to generate images. The clip subdirectory contains clipped text encoders. These are the things that are responsible for interpreting and embedding prompt text, understanding the relationship between images and text. Clip Vision is used for processing input images as a form of guidance, or generating outputs that depend on a visual embedding. The control net subdirectory, this is responsible for holding control net models. These add kind of structural guidance to our generation process. So for example, using a depth map like we do with the pseudo random plugin. IP adapter will contain models for image prompt adapters, IP adapters, which allow the system to be guided not just by image, not just by text prompts, but also by image examples, like has been demonstrated with our tool. And then finally, the LoRa's subdirectory contain LoRa models, low rank adaptation models, which are basically like lightweight fine tunings of the base models that let you do kind of stylistic sort of stuff. So these are the main things that we use in the context of the pseudo random plugin. So we've got our directory structure established. So now we need to configure ComfyUI to look in this directory when it's looking for models to load. So one important note as we do so, you notice we haven't deleted this folder, the original one, the default one, and that's good because it has all these other things in it, right? When we tell ComfyUI to look at these folders, we're not saying look here instead. We're saying look here in addition to the corresponding subfolder. So you see here in models, there's a folder called checkpoints, and now we're going to add one called checkpoints here. We're not saying only look in one of these checkpoint directories. We're actually saying look in both of them, right? So your model might be in either one of these. We're basically going to manage this, but if you ever, we're going to manage it kind of manually. We're just going to download files and put them in there. But if you ever load a model through the ComfyUI interface, there's a way of doing that where you can like load any missing models, or there's a model manager. They're going to end up in the default folder in this one. They're not going to end up here. If you wanted to manually move them over, you could, but just know that the ComfyUI is still going to primarily use the default location. Okay, so how do we tell ComfyUI about this new location? We're going to go back to the ComfyUI interface like this. And this time we're going to go not to the manager, but we're going to go to help, and we're going to open a folder. We're not going to open a folder. Instead, we're going to open this thing, extra model paths.yaml. YAML is a syntax for describing configurations of things. All the rest of these are folders. This is a file. So when I click on this, you'll see, for me, it opens in Notepad++, which is my favorite plain text editor. Let's make that a little bit bigger. For you, it will open in whatever text editor you decide. It might ask you what text editor you want to open it in. The only thing here is to make sure to open this in a plain text editor and not like Microsoft Word or something like that, because it's got the formatting is not important and it'll mess everything up. So this is a YAML file, a configuration file, and you see there's stuff already here. We want to leave all that alone because it's stuff that we don't want to mess with, right? I think we could, but I don't know what will happen. Instead, we want to add something to it, and what we want to add looks. I'm going to just paste it in because it's already on the worksheet that I gave you. It's going to look like this. So we're going to add a new sort of section called Custom Models, and you see checkpoints, clip vision, ControlNet, IP adapter, and LoRa's. Those each map to our the subfolders we just created, except I've got a placeholder in here. So we should be talking about paths. So let's just grab that path. So it should, for me, look like this. I'm going to replace that placeholder with the actual path. Oh, that's missing a slash. There we go. And like so. So there we go. So now we've told this can be via this configuration file. We've told ComfyUI that you should check for checkpoints in this extra location, for clip in this extra location, blah, blah, blah. So we save that. And again, I'm using a plain text editor, not anything fancy like Microsoft Word. Close this and come back to Comfy. And I think I need to do a restart to see the change. So let's do a quick restart. As it's starting up here, notice that there's these extra search paths mentioned in the log as it's loading. And I'm seeing the proper location there. A little hard to see as it goes by, but I did see it. All right. So how do I know that worked? Well, I think we're actually going to need to wait until the next part to begin to populate models into those new directories to understand if what we just changed actually made a difference. So we can close this part. We've basically done some directory madness. We created a link to the workflows directory so that from our preferred location, which is here, we can access our workflows more easily. We've changed the output directory. We haven't tested that yet, but that's okay. I think it works. And then we've pointed ComfyUI to these new model locations. So we've basically set up some directories. All right, so that closes part 2. Let's move on to part 3. Now that our custom model directory, the custom model path, has been both set up in terms of the folder structure, and we've also told Comfy about it. We can now move on to the third part, where we're going to download and install some machine learning models, really just the essential ones that are necessary for the basic functioning of the pseudorandom plugin, as well as to run the sort of basic examples that we provided for you guys. So to do so, we're going to download some large files. So I'll show this behind me as I talk about a little bit about what this is. So machine learning models, as I mentioned before, are quite large. The files that contain the weights for machine learning models are quite large. Too large to be stored on a kind of like code repository website like GitHub. And so other infrastructure has emerged to handle these kinds of things. One such piece of infrastructure is called Hugging Face. And Hugging Face is similar to GitHub in that it works through repositories, but it's made for machine learning in particular. So it handles very large files. It also happens to provide services for running models and such, but we're not going to use it in that way. So what we're going to need to do is obtain some basic models, really the essential models that are necessary for the plugin to operate. These are provided to you via a Hugging Face repository, seen here, that's maintained by SudoTools and has interesting models that you could use in relationship to the plugin. Among these interesting models are the essential ones. So you won't be downloading everything you see here, but you'll be downloading some of it. So just a quick tour of what this looks like. So when you first come to the repo, you might see something like this, which is like a basic description and whatnot. If you click here on files and versions, you'll see a bunch of folders, and these might look familiar to you. There's checkpoints. There's the thing called Clip Vision. There's IP adapters, etc. These look very similar to the directories that we just set up. Inside each one of these, you'll find a number of files. We're not going to need all of these, but we are going to need some of them. If you are interested in any of the rest of them, feel free to download them and place them where you think they might go. This is always going to be organized by the proper folder that they go into on your ComfyUI model directory. So anything you find in the ControlNet folder should go in the ControlNet directory. Anything you find in the LoRa's folder should go in the LoRa directory, etc. Okay, so that's what that looks like. If you refer to, to this, which I assume is the page that you're watching this video from. If not, I'll provide a link to it. Linked here are all of the essential models you need to run the plugin in a very basic way, just the most essential stuff. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things you have to download. These can be large, these can be not so large, and they each go into their own directory. So let's start here with SDXL base safe tensors, for example. It's a little hard to find. There's the download link right there. So if I click that, it'll start downloading. And I see that this is almost a 7 GB model. So that'll take a little bit of time to download. So what you want to do, I'll go ahead and start that downloading. Go ahead and download that. And while it's downloading, you might want to click through the rest of these and do the same. So here's a Clip Vision one. You want to download that. I won't do it. Another Clip Vision one ControlNet model, and one IP adapter model. These things take a little time to download. I'm going to go ahead and stop that because secretly I've already downloaded them, and I'll just show you what to do with them once you have them. Okay, actually, no, I'm not going to show you what to do with them. You know how to move files around. So download the files, put them in their proper locations. You should see something like this. So here under IP adapter, I've got one file as directed under IP adapter. Under ControlNet, I might have 2 here. Now I've only got 1. There you go, like that. So something like that is what you should see. And for Clip Vision, I've got 2. For Clip, I think I have 2 in here, but I didn't call for that. So those might be extra stuff. And also here in checkpoints, you see I actually have a few more than the essential ones. These are other ones that I'm interested in running. So all you need is the SDXL base. I've got a few more. So I've placed all of those models into, again, this is the X drive. This is my my custom model directory drive. It's not the default one. But we can see that when we start up, oh, I need to restart. I'm going to go ahead and restart ComfyUI, so it's to make it aware of those things. When we restart ComfyUI, it will now search those locations for models and I'll be able to see that it can load them. And I will show you how to do that. Okay, so ComfyUI has loaded. If you go here to the little cube on the left, model library, you'll see a bunch of folders with similar names to the subfolders that we just had. So here under checkpoints, you can see I've got the 4 that were listed in my directory, including Stable Diffusion XL 1.0 base right there. If I go to Clip Vision, I think I had 2. Yep, very good. Etc. ControlNet, there's 1. Fantastic. Okay, so that's everything that I expected to see. If I need to refresh that, I can do that here. All right. So with those models downloaded and placed in the proper locations, that's the end of part 3. We can move on to part 4, where we'll configure things to begin to try to connect Rhino to the ComfyUI environment. Okay, one last part. So here we're going to be configuring the ComfyUI server settings to make sure that ComfyUI can communicate with the Rhino plugin running on your same computer. So a bit of explanation here. I'm calling it a server. You might be wondering, well, what's being served here? There's no internet connection necessarily going on here, and that's true. So under the hood, ComfyUI actually works in through much the same protocols as the web would. So there's actually a kind of server running under the hood of ComfyUI that the user interface for ComfyUI actually accesses and then displays things relative to. So you can actually see that server if you go to just a web browser and type in this address, 127.0.0.1 : I believe 8000 is the default. If you just type that in, there we go. I think I was missing the HTTP. If you just type that in a web browser, you'll see exactly the same interface as you see in the ComfyUI desktop. That's because you're doing exactly the same thing. The ComfyUI desktop is really just a browser that's kind of calling the server and then rendering it. So you can do that either way that you'd like. Let's go back to regular ComfyUI. And that's exactly how the Rhino plugin connects to the ComfyUI kind of as a service. So let's go ahead and configure that server and make sure that the pseudorandom plugin can effectively speak to it. So the way to do that is to go to the settings again, and then go to the server configuration, and then just check this value, these 2 values, the host and the port. The host should be at 127.0.0.1. That's the default, and there's no reason to change it. And the port ought to be 8000. That is the default port, and that is what the most recent build of the pseudorandom plugin should speak with. Some older versions of the plugin were using a different port 8188, so you might need to change that if you're using an older version of the pseudorandom plugin, but if you're using the most up-to-date version, it should be just fine. So mainly just check those, that everything looks as it should, and if it does, then that's fine. If it doesn't, then change it, and you'll need to do a restart to ComfyUI to see those effects. But the other thing we can do to verify, here we go, it's already up, is go to this URL, which has got a little bit extra at the end of it. So you see that there's the 127.0.0.1 : 8000, and then slash, and this is something that the pseudorandom the pseudo comfy custom nodes built in to communicate with the pseudorandom plugin. If you put a /API/pseudorandom/affordances, then you'll get something which looks a little something like this. And you see here, it is actually listing the checkpoints and the models and similar that we've installed, the custom nodes that we've installed. And that's so the pseudorandom plugin on Rhino can check to see if a workflow is compatible with what your server is able to do. So you can always check that here at this URL, and I'll put a link to that on the instruction sheet. All right, so as long as you see that at that URL, then everything is configured properly, and we can move on. One last task before we go, and that is to check here in Rhino if we're able to ping the ComfyUI server as we've configured it. And if we're able to check to see if a given workflow, we'll be able to run on that workflow. Fair warning, I'm not actually going to make a rendering this time because the computer I'm on at the moment doesn't have a GPU that's powerful enough to do so. So instead, I'm just going to ping it. I'm going to get a green light from Rhino and just see that it's working. In the next video, we'll actually do a rendering, which will be exciting. A quick recap over here in Comfy. Let's close that up. Over here in Comfy, we've got a server running. We configured that server. We've got machine learning models in certain places. And we're already aware of this, which is the list of affordances that our server kind of communicates to Rhino anytime that it's running. So over here on the Rhino side, what does that look like? So this is the pseudo-random plugin for Rhino, which you might be familiar with. You can see here that there is currently no endpoint selected. So we have to select that local server that we've set up. So if we do that, already we'll see the server connection is healthy. That's great. If we ever need to ping it again, we can just click this button and ping it again. And then we can see down here in the status window that the local server is online. This status display needs some work, so it'll probably change in a future version of the plugin, but that's the way it looks right now. So already we know we're getting a connection to the local server. That's one green light. We're just looking for one more. Let's go ahead and select a workflow and check on if the server's affordances support the requirements of the given workflow. So each one of these workflows, you see I've got, I don't know, 5 here or so. There might be more in what you're seeing. Each one of these has a unique set of requirements for what machine learning models are necessary in order to run that workflow. Given my setup, I think I'll be able to run all of these. Given the essential setup that we just talked through, you might not be able to run some of them, but I'll update this so you can at least run one of them. So if I select a workflow, like this first one, and you can see already down here at the bottom, it's already checked the requirements of the workflow versus the affordances of the endpoint. And you see that the workflow, this one, is indeed compatible. So that's the second green light that we're looking for. It means that we've done everything correctly and we're ready to render, which we'll do in the next video. So just a quick recap on what we did today. We configured ComfyUI as a local endpoint for Rhino that involved installing 2 essential node packages, sudo-comfy and IP adapter. We configured some key directory locations. We haven't actually used them yet. We will. The model directories, the workflow directories, and the output directory. Can't wait to see those in action. And finally, we've downloaded and placed a set of essential machine learning models from a list of things that are really core to the pseudo-random workflow, and we put those in the right locations. And then after that, we configured the server and we tested it. So all lights are green. I look forward to seeing you in the next video when we actually put this into action. Thanks for watching.